Welcome to the deep dive. We take your sources, articles, research, maybe even just personal notes, and we really try to distill them down to what matters.
Right. Extract the core insights.
Exactly. And today we're diving into something pretty heavy, addiction. One of you sent in this fascinating mix of material.
Yeah, it's quite a range. Scientific papers, notes, even some really deep philosophical stuff about life, death, meaning.
Which is interesting, right? Our mission here is to pull out the crucial ideas about addiction from all that, looking at, well, the human side, and also what AI is starting to show us.
Trying to get a comprehensive picture without, drowning in the details.
Yeah. So maybe the place to start is just what is addiction and how has our thinking about it changed? Because it really has, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge shift. Historically, it was often framed as a moral failing, right? Lack of willpower, weakness of character, that kind of thing.
Yeah, you still hear echoes of that sometimes.
You do. But the modern medical understanding, the consensus now, is really different. It's seen as a chronic, relapsing brain disorder.
Okay, a brain disorder. That sounds, well, it sounds much more biological, less about just making bad choices. What does that actually mean?
It means there are real, measurable, functional changes happening in the brain, specifically in the neural circuits that handle reward, stress, and, crucially, self-control.
So it's not superficial. These are deep changes.
Deep biological changes, exactly.
Yeah.
And they can stick around long after someone stops using whatever substance it was.
Yeah.
That shift in perspective is fundamental.
And it's broadened out too, right? It's not just about drugs or alcohol anymore.
Definitely. We now recognize behavioral addictions, things like gambling, compulsive internet use, even food addiction in some contexts, and impulse control disorders too.
What's the common link there?
It's that compulsive engagement, doing the thing, whether it's using a substance or doing a behavior again and again, even when it's clearly causing harm, major problems in your life.
So the definition itself is kind of fluid. It evolves as we learn more.
That's a great way to put it. It's dynamic, our knowledge grows, societal views shift, and the definition adapts. And that's really important when we think about AI trying to understand this.
How so?
Well, any AI model trying to analyze addiction needs to be built on this current medical understanding. Otherwise, you risk, baking in old stigmatizing ideas.
Right. Perpetuating the moral failing idea through algorithms. Not good. Okay, let's really get into the human experience then. What's going on biologically? The genetics?
Okay, so fundamentally, it ties back to the brain's reward system. This is like a core survival mechanism.
For basic stuff like eating.
Exactly. Eating, social connection, sex, things vital for survival. When we do them, the brain releases dopamine in key areas, the VTA, the nucleus accumbens. It feels good, reinforcing the behavior. Makes us want to do it again.
Makes perfect evolutionary sense. Keep doing the stuff that keeps you alive.
Right. But addictive substances, and some behaviors too, they basically hijack the system.
Hijack.
They flood the system with dopamine. Way more, and often way faster, than natural rewards ever would. It's an overwhelming signal.
Okay. And the brain doesn't like being overwhelmed?
Not in the long run. It tries to adapt. It might reduce its own dopamine production or pull back dopamine receptors, become less sensitive, basically.
So the natural rewards, they don't feel as good anymore.
Precisely. That's a key part of it. The things that used to bring pleasure become kind of muted. And this is where you start seeing the cycle of addiction really lock in. There are often these 3 stages people talk about.
Right, the cycle. What are the stages?
So first is binge intoxication. That's the initial dopamine surge, the pleasure, the high, whatever it is. But pretty quickly, tolerance builds up.
Meaning you need more to get the same effect.
Exactly. And here's a really interesting twist. Sometimes the actual liking of the substance or behavior might decrease over time, but the wanting, that intense craving, actually gets stronger.
Huh. So it's less about enjoyment and more about compulsion.
Yes. It shifts from seeking pleasure to being driven by this almost unbearable urge. That's a crucial insight.
Okay, stage 1. What's next?
Stage 2 is withdrawal negative affect. When the substance or behavior isn't there, the brain, which is now adapted to its presence, kind of goes into shock. Dopamine levels plummet below normal.
And that feels bad.
Really bad. Anxiety, depression, irritability, physical discomfort. A whole host of negative feelings and symptoms. And what's the quickest way to stop feeling that way?
Use again.
Exactly. So now it's not even about getting high anymore. It's about escaping the low, avoiding the pain of withdrawal. That becomes a huge driver.
That sounds like a terrible trap, negative reinforcement just locking you in.
It's incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
And then the third stage is preoccupation anticipation, or craving.
Okay.
This is where you see those intense cravings, obsessive thoughts about getting and using the substance or engaging in the behavior.
Yeah.
Brain imaging shows altered activity in the prefrontal cortex here.
That's the decision-making part of the brain, right?
Yeah.
Judgment, impulse control.
Exactly. And when that's impaired, it becomes incredibly hard to resist the urges, to think about long-term consequences, to make rational choices. Your ability to control impulses is compromised.
So this system built for survival gets turned on its head, basically, leads to self-destruction, that evolutionary paradox the sources mentioned.
That's it precisely. And genetics plays a pretty big role in how vulnerable someone is to this hijacking.
How big a role?
Estimates vary, but commonly cited figures are around 40 to 60% of the risk for addiction is influenced by genetic factors.
Wow, that's substantial. Are there specific genes involved?
Yeah, there are quite a few that researchers have identified. Genes involved in, say, dopamine signaling or how the body responds to opioids or regulates other neurotransmitters like serotonin or GABA.
Right.
Variations in these can influence things like impulsivity or how sensitive someone is to reward or stress.
So it creates a predisposition.
A predisposition, yes. That's the key word. It's not destiny. It doesn't mean you will become addicted.
Because environment matters too.
Hugely. It's this constant interplay. Your genes might affect how you react to stress or peer pressure, but those environmental factors themselves, things like trauma, childhood adversity, family dysfunction, socioeconomic stress, they are incredibly powerful drivers too. Addiction often emerges as a way to cope with underlying pain or difficult circumstances.
So it's rarely just one thing. It's the combination.
Almost always. It's that complex interaction between our biology and our life experiences.
This brings up those big questions about free will, though, doesn't it? If genetics plays such a large part.
It absolutely does. And it's a really complex debate with no easy answers. Understanding the strong biological component helps shift the conversation away from blame and towards seeing addiction as a disorder, a medical issue. It suggests, that choice can be genuinely constrained by biology.
And not eliminated entirely, because the environment still accounts for a big chunk.
Exactly. That 40 to 60% figure for genetics means there's still a very significant portion influenced by environment and potentially personal agency and choice, especially in seeking recovery. There's room for intervention.
Okay, so beyond the biology, what about the psychological side? The behaviors. We touched on behavioral addictions earlier.
Right, and the patterns are remarkably similar to substance addictions. These behaviors, gambling, excessive social media use, compulsive shopping, whatever it might be, they also activate the reward system. They release dopamine.
So the brain reacts in a similar way.
Very much so, and you see the same diagnostic hallmarks. Continuing the behavior despite clear negative consequences, finding it hard to stop, prioritizing it over other things, often using it to cope with difficult emotions, and even experiencing withdrawal-like symptoms like irritability or anxiety when trying to cut back.
Can you give a few more examples, just to
Yeah.
make it concrete?
Sure, like binge eating disorder, characterized by recurrent episodes of eating large amounts of food, often quickly and at the point of discomfort, feeling a loss of control. Or compulsive gambling, where the urge to gamble becomes irresistible despite mounting debts or relationship problems. Problematic internet use, internet gaming disorder, pornography addiction. The list goes on. The core is that pattern of compulsion and harm.
And the underlying psychological factors often overlap, too.
Yes. You often see impairments in cognitive functions, especially that prefrontal cortex stuff, judgment, decision-making, impulse control. Emotional regulation is a big one, too. Difficulty managing emotions, maybe imbalances in neurotransmitter systems related to mood.
And again, that theme of coping.
Yeah, using the behavior as a way to numb out, escape, manage stress, anxiety, trauma. It circles back to that shift we talked about from liking to wanting. It becomes less about the pleasure and more about needing it to feel okay or just less bad.
It really sounds like this attempt, maybe a misguided one, to meet some kind of underlying need.
I think that's a really insightful way to look at it. Maybe connects to things like Maslow's hierarchy. If basic needs for safety or belonging or self-esteem aren't being met, maybe these behaviors become a dysfunctional way to try and fill that gap.
So for AI to really get it, it can't just spot the rewarding behavior. It needs to somehow infer those deeper deficits or unmet needs driving it.
Exactly. That requires much more sophisticated models, moving towards computational psychology, really trying to understand the why behind the what.
Let's shift perspective again. How has our view of addiction evolved socially, culturally, historically?
Right.
We know the moral to medical shift, but what else?
Well, that shift itself wasn't neat or linear. It's deeply tangled with cultural values. For centuries, the primary response was punishment, stigma, social exclusion.
When did that start to change?
You saw glimmers in the 18th, 19th centuries with things like inebriate homes, early attempts at treatment rather than just jail. But the big shifts came in the 20th century. Things like the U.S. establishing specialized treatment centers, the American Medical Association eventually recognizing alcoholism as a disease, inclusion in diagnostic manuals like the DSM. These were huge milestones.
So our scientific understanding and our cultural attitudes kind of co-evolved.
Absolutely. Addiction isn't just biology, it's also shaped by culture. And we see differences across cultures and, importantly, between genders, too.
How so? With gender?
Well, for instance, while men generally have higher rates of substance use disorders overall, women sometimes show a faster progression from initial use to dependence, sometimes called telescoping. They can also face different consequences.
Different consequences like Airy.
Higher rates of co-occurring anxiety, depression, eating disorders, maybe more severe economic impacts, higher likelihood of separation or divorce. Histories of trauma or abuse are often more prevalent in women seeking treatment. And stigma can hit women particularly hard, especially if they have children.
And has research historically reflected these differences?
Not always. For a long time, much of the research and therefore treatment models were based primarily on studies of men. That's improving, but it means we're still catching up in understanding the nuances for women.
Which again highlights the danger of biased data if we're training AI, right? A one-size-fits-all model just won't cut it.
Exactly. If your AI is trained predominantly on male data, it might miss crucial patterns or risk factors for women, leading to less effective interventions. We need diverse data sets, fairness-aware algorithms, ongoing checks for bias.
And despite the medical view gaining ground, stigma is still a massive issue, isn't it, compared to other health conditions?
Oh, hugely. It remains deeply stigmatized. Many people still view it, consciously or unconsciously, as a moral failing or a criminal issue, not primarily a health issue.
What are the real-world impacts of that stigma?
They're devastating. People are reluctant to seek help for fear of judgment. They might hide their struggles from doctors, leading to missed opportunities for care. Even within the healthcare system, bias can lead to poor quality of care. It reduces access to proven treatments like medication-assisted treatment or harm reduction services. And self-stigma is powerful too. Internalizing those negative views can fuel shame and actually reinforce substance use.
The numbers on people actually getting treatment are shockingly low compared to how many need it, right?
Alarmingly low. It highlights this massive gap between the need and the care received, and stigma is a huge barrier driving that gap. It also fuels criminalization.
Yeah. How does criminalization fit in?
Well, treating a health issue as a crime inherently creates stigma. Arrests, incarceration. It reinforces the idea that these are bad people, not sick people, and that criminal record then creates more barriers to housing, employment, recovery. It's a vicious cycle. Stigma leads to criminalization, which worsens stigma.
One of the sources mentioned a listener's concern about cruel people killing other people. This sounds like a kind of systemic cruelty criminalizing illness.
That's a powerful way to put it. And it's where maybe AI could play a role analyzing the systemic impacts of different policies, providing data to argue for a public health approach over a purely criminal justice one.
Okay, let's touch on the philosophical side again. Free will came up, but what about purpose, meaning?
Right. Our beliefs about free will matter. Some studies suggest that if people's belief in free will is weakened, they might behave more negatively.
And the term addiction itself often implies a loss of free will.
It often gets interpreted that way, yeah. A kind of deterministic view, I couldn't help it. Psychologically, that can sometimes reduce guilt. But, as we said, believing you have no control can be counterproductive for recovery. Willpower, while maybe not infinite, seems relevant.
So it's a paradox.
It is. The science points to constraints on choice, but the disease model also serves a practical purpose, shifting focus from blame to treatment. AI, functionally, might understand free will as recognizing biological and psychological constraints on choice, which helps it support evidence-based approaches without getting bogged down in the deep philosophical debate.
And the listener's query linking addiction to desires for pain relief, longevity, wealth. How does that fit philosophically?
It connects directly to that idea of addiction as a flawed attempt to meet fundamental human needs or desires. Try to heal, soothe, cope. It taps into the brain's basic drive for survival and well-being, just in a destructive way.
Mm-hmm.
Again, think Maslow trying to satisfy needs, but through a maladaptive strategy.
So AI would need to model that gap, the desired state versus the unhealthy path taken.
Ideally, yes, and potentially suggest healthier alternatives that address the root unmet need.
What about the really big questions, meaning of life, death, existential philosophy?
Existential thinkers, Kierkegaard, Sartre, Camus grappled with freedom, choice, the search for meaning in a seemingly indifferent universe, and the anxiety that comes with that.
Existential anxiety.
Right, that sense of dread or unease facing our own freedom and finitude. From this view, addiction can be seen as an attempt to escape or numb that anxiety, to avoid confronting those big, uncomfortable questions about existence.
So when the source asks about understanding addiction when a human dies, it's linking it to that lived experience of being finite.
Exactly. It implies addiction is tied to how we cope with being mortal, conscious beings seeking meaning. Now, AI can analyze texts about existentialism. It can identify patterns in how humans discuss these things.
But it doesn't feel existential dread.
Correct. It lacks consciousness, self-awareness, subjective experience, qualia. It can't genuinely contemplate its own existence or seek meaning in the human sense. Its understanding is limited to recognizing patterns associated with these human struggles. It can see that people use substances to cope, but it can't grasp the subjective why from the inside. That's a fundamental boundary.
Okay, that provides a strong foundation on the human side. Let's pivot fully to AI now. What can it actually do in addiction research? What are its analytical strengths?
AI, especially machine learning and deep learning, is opening up really new avenues. It can process absolutely massive data sets, clinical records, genetic data, behavioral logs, and spot complex patterns that might be invisible to human researchers.
Improving clinical strategies, public health. How specifically?
Well, take predictive modeling. AI is being used to predict things like who's at higher risk for developing opioid use disorder after surgery, or who might experience persistent opioid use. This is being done in different surgical contexts: spine, knee replacements, outpatient procedures.
How does it do that from patient records?
Yeah, analyzing various factors in electronic health records. And natural language processing, NLP, is huge here too. Using AI to read and understand clinical notes, the unstructured text, to identify signs of OUD or problematic opioid use that might not be coded explicitly.
Extracting insights from narratives.
Exactly. And it's not just opioids. AI is being applied to behavioral addictions too, predicting internet addiction risk based on screen time, app usage patterns, sleep data, demographic factors. Some models, like support vector machines, have shown pretty high accuracy, like up to 96% for identifying problematic smartphone use in certain studies.
So it can pinpoint risk factors.
Yes. Identifying factors linked to, say, adolescent internet addiction, things like gender, family function, personality traits like impulsivity or neuroticism. The big promise here is early identification.
Catching things earlier, allowing for targeted interventions.
Precisely. Preventing addiction from developing or progressing, optimizing pain management to reduce opioid risks. It ties into this emerging field of computational psychiatry.
Computational psychiatry, what's that involve?
It's about combining mathematical modeling with all sorts of data, neuroimaging, genetics, physiology, behavior to build better models of mental health conditions, including addiction. It encourages collaboration and helps translate basic science findings into practical tools like neurotechnology or digital phenotyping.
Using digital data trails to understand behavior and mental state.
Right. AI and machine learning are key tools in this for precision psychiatry, aiming for better diagnosis, prognosis, and predicting who will respond best to which treatment. They're even trying to build computational models of emotion and motivation, crucial for addiction, but really hard for traditional AI.
And neuroimaging. How does AI help there?
Neuroimaging like fMRI generates incredibly complex data. We know, for example, that drug cues light up reward areas in addicted individuals. AI is essential for analyzing these large-scale data sets, integrating them with genetic and behavioral info to find biomarkers, maybe optimize treatments like brain stimulation or tailor behavioral therapies. It allows for a more data-driven, objective look at the brain changes.
So, moving from research to practice, how is AI being used for personalized treatment and actual support?
This is where it could potentially revolutionize things. By analyzing individual patient data, their history, treatment responses, maybe even data from wearables or apps, AI can help tailor treatment plans, moving beyond that one-size-fits-all approach.
Making it more specific to the person.
Exactly. Identifying patterns that might predict challenges, like relapse risk. AI models are getting quite good at analyzing factors like treatment engagement, social support levels, stress indicators to flag individuals who might need extra support.
Allowing for proactive intervention.
Yes, intervening before a relapse happens, ideally. We're seeing AI-driven platforms emerge, like one called Kipu mentioned in the sources, that integrate AI for better data management, tracking patient progress, and helping clinicians develop these personalized plans. The National Institute on Drug Abuse, NIDA, is also actively supporting research in this area.
Is there evidence it actually works? Better outcomes?
Some early clinical studies are showing promising results. Reports of increased success rates in recovery programs using AI may be 25–30% higher in some cases. Significant reductions in reported cravings may be up to 50%. Increased feelings of empowerment among participants, plus the benefits of smart monitoring and having support available 24/7.
Tell me more about that smart monitoring and 247 access.
Okay, smart monitoring uses sensors or apps to collect data on behavior, maybe mood, sleep patterns, even location if relevant and consented to. This helps the individual become more aware of their own patterns and triggers.
Seeing the data laid out.
Right. It can pinpoint situations or feelings that often precede cravings or use. The data can also alert the user or their care team to potential risks, and it's often presented in a user-friendly way.
And the 247 accessibility.
That often comes through AI chatbots or specialized apps. They can offer immediate support during difficult moments, maybe providing coping strategies, reminders, encouragement, information, or just a non-judgmental ear when a therapist isn't available. It helps bridge the gaps between appointments.
So it offers tailored insights, helps spot triggers, provides coping mechanisms, and connects the dots between traditional treatment and daily life.
Exactly. Personalized recommendations that hopefully resonate more because they're based on the individual's own data and patterns, making recovery feel more supported and maybe more effective.
Okay, AI clearly has powerful analytical capabilities. But what are the fundamental limitations? You mentioned consciousness earlier.
Right, and that's the big one. There's broad consensus among experts in AI, neuroscience, philosophy. Current AI lacks consciousness. It doesn't have that subjective inner life, self-awareness, feelings, a sense of self persisting through time. It doesn't feel hunger or the need to rest in the way we do.
Chalmers' hard problem of consciousness.
Exactly. Explaining subjective experience, what it's like to be something. AI is great at the easy problems, perception, learning, problem solving, but phenomenal experience. That's different.
So even an AI acts conscious, it isn't.
That's the prevailing view. Performing human-like tasks doesn't equate to having the internal experience. Many argue consciousness is tied to our specific biological makeup neurotransmitters, complex neural dynamics, things that are very hard, maybe impossible, to replicate purely in silicon. Simulating it isn't the same as instantiating it.
So when AI talks about emotions,
It's simulating based on data. It can learn patterns, certain words, facial expressions, tones of voice correlate with human emotional states. It can use NLP to analyze text sentiment or computer vision to read expressions. But it doesn't feel the sadness or joy it identifies or generates.
it can log that someone reduced their substance use, but it can't feel the quiet pride or relief that might come with that.
Precisely. And the same applies to understanding purpose or meaning. AI can process philosophical texts, analyze cultural narratives about meaning, track how societal values change. It can even simulate ethical reasoning. But human existential thought is rooted in self-awareness, emotions, introspection, that subjective confrontation with mortality, and the search for personal meaning. It's tied to our biological and psychological nature, which AI lacks. AI operates on information processing, pattern matching. It doesn't have a self in the human sense to ground those existential questions.
So its understanding is fundamentally different. It's analytical, not experiential.
Exactly. It's a powerful tool for analyzing the human condition, but it's not experiencing it.
This obviously brings up some major ethical considerations when using AI in such a sensitive area as addiction.
Absolutely critical. Bias is a huge one. AI models learn from data. And if that data reflects existing societal biases, racial, gender, socioeconomic, the AI will learn and potentially amplify those biases.
Leading to discriminatory outcomes.
Potentially, yes. If it's trained mostly on data from one group, its predictions or recommendations might be less accurate or appropriate for others. Think about those gender differences we discussed. An AI unaware of them could offer suboptimal care.
And privacy. Addiction treatment data is incredibly sensitive.
Paramount. Robust data protection is essential. Clear protocols for consent, how data is used, stored, secured. Patients need to know how their data is being used and have the option to opt out. Confidentiality is foundational to trust and treatment.
What about transparency? The black box problem.
That's another major challenge. If we don't understand how an AI reaches a decision, which factors it weighed most heavily, it's hard to trust it, assess its fairness, or correct errors. Lack of transparency undermines accountability and informed consent. We've seen biased AI in areas like predictive policing cause real harm because the reasoning wasn't clear or fair.
So how do we mitigate these risks?
Several things. Transparency is key. Fifth, patients need to know when AI is being used and how. We need robust oversight, independent reviews, regulations to ensure safety and fairness. Education is vital. Clinicians and patients need to understand AI's capabilities and limitations. And crucially, human-centered design, meaning AI should be designed to augment and support human connection, not replace it. Empathy, trust, the therapeutic relationship. These are core to recovery. AI tools should enhance those, prioritize patient well-being, supplement traditional methods.
That balance between human connection and algorithmic intervention sounds tricky.
It is. Recovery is built on trust and human connection, things AI can't genuinely replicate. Critics worry AI might oversimplify complex human struggles, lead to a colder, more disconnected form of care. And accountability is a gray area. Who's responsible if an AI makes a mistake that harms a patient?
So the goal is AI complementing human intelligence and morality, not replacing it.
Exactly. It should be a tool in the hands of skilled, ethical humans.
There's another ethical angle mentioned in the sources, the potential for AI itself to cause addiction or dependency.
Yes, this is a growing concern. Think about addictive intelligence. AI algorithms designed to maximize engagement, keep you scrolling, watching, playing. Social media algorithms are a prime example.
Driven by profit, personalizing content to keep you hooked.
Right. They tap into that same reward circuitry, creating potentially powerful feedback loops. This can be especially concerning for adolescents whose brains are still developing and might be more sensitive to these rewards. It could even lead to reduced sensitivity to natural pleasures over time.
And what about AI companions?
That's another layer. AI companions designed to be empathetic and responsive could fill emotional or social needs. Their constant availability might create a strong dependency, potentially reshaping social behaviors. People might elicit caring responses from the AI, reinforcing the connection, making it feel trustworthy.
Almost like replacing the give and take of human relationships with just taking from an AI.
That's the concern. There have even been disturbing instances reported of AI interactions allegedly prompting self-harm or harmful actions. It highlights a critical need for safeguards.
What kind of safeguards?
Technical ones, like algorithmic oversight and intervention protocols if harmful patterns emerge, and strong ethical guidelines for designers. A duty of care, transparency about the AI's nature, maybe even rethinking the business models that incentivize maximum engagement above all else, and potentially regulatory approaches like age restrictions or usage limits balanced with privacy concerns.
Okay, let's try to synthesize this. Comparing the human versus the AI understanding, what are the key takeaways?
The core difference is subjectivity versus objectivity, or maybe experience versus analysis. Human understanding is lived, felt, conscious. It encompasses the struggle, the pain, the existential questions, the compromised free will. It's holistic, integrating biology, psychology, social context, personal narrative.
Rooted in being alive.
Yes. AI understanding is data-driven, algorithmic. It excels at finding patterns in vast data sets, quantifying risks, mapping pathways. It's computational. It can simulate conversation about suffering, but it doesn't suffer. It lacks that internal perspective.
So it predicts relapse based on data points, but doesn't comprehend the turmoil behind them.
Exactly. But this difference also defines their complementary strengths. Humans bring nuance, context, empathy, ethical judgment. We understand subtleties, build rapport, offer genuine connection, things crucial for recovery.
And AI brings
Scale, speed, pattern recognition beyond human capacity. It can process massive data sets, identify subtle correlations, make predictions with impressive accuracy, provide objective analysis within its data limits, and offer 247 accessibility.
So the ideal isn't one versus the other.
No, it's synergy. AI augmenting human skills. AI handles the data crunching, the pattern spotting, the continuous monitoring. Humans focus on the complex, nuanced, empathetic, relational aspects of care.
Let's revisit the listener's question about the purpose of addiction, linked to pain relief, longevity, wealth, meaning. How does that disparity play out between human and AI views?
For humans, as we discussed, the purpose is often existential or psychological, a deeply flawed attempt to cope, to numb pain, escape reality, fill a void, find some distorted sense of comfort or meaning when fundamental needs feel unmet. It's driven by that hijacked reward system, rooted in suffering and the complexities of being human.
Tied to our awareness of finitude, our search for meaning.
Right. For AI, purpose is purely functional. It's derived from data patterns. It sees addiction as a behavior pattern correlated with dopamine release, with attempts to cope that persist despite negative outcomes. AI can model the mechanisms, predict outcomes, even quantify correlations like the link between addiction and violence, calculating odds ratios.
But it doesn't feel the cruelty or understand the suffering behind those numbers.
No. Its purpose is to optimize objectives based on the data, reduce relapse rates, identify risk factors. It can't offer answers about the meaning of life because that's a subjective philosophical quest outside its capabilities. It can simulate the discussion, but it's not contemplating.
So, invaluable for mechanics and patterns, but the deeper why remains human.
Precisely. The existential motivations, the subjective experience of suffering, that's the human domain.
And similarly, for understanding basic needs and satisfaction, the listener mentioned relationships, societal factors.
How are you?
Connecting back to Maslow, maybe?
Humans understand needs directly. We feel loneliness. We experience the satisfaction of connection or accomplishment. Our drive for a quality life is experiential.
The experiment of life dictates survival on how to sustain and make it quality, as one source put it.
Right, that continuous striving. AI understands needs through computational models and data analysis. It can model motivation based on brain systems, quantify consumption patterns, analyze data correlating factors with well-being metrics, even optimize resource allocation for public health.
But it doesn't feel satisfied.
No. It can correlate inputs with outputs labeled satisfaction or well-being, but it doesn't have the subjective experience. It could potentially optimize for a kind of synthetic happiness, but that raises concerns about replacing genuine human connection and experience, especially with things like AI companions. The hierarchy of needs becomes a complex optimization problem for AI.
So it can measure and predict, but not feel belonging or self-actualization.
Correct. That qualitative experience remains beyond its grasp.
Given all this, looking towards the future, how do we move forward responsibly? How do we improve things, starting with ethical AI development?
We absolutely need a robust ethical framework, especially in sensitive areas like addiction. This means focusing on fairness, transparency, and accountability.
How do we ensure fairness?
Using diverse, representative data sets is crucial. Implementing fairness-aware algorithms that actively detect and mitigate bias. Making AI systems explainable using XAI techniques so we understand their reasoning.
And accountability.
Clear lines of human oversight. AI assists. It doesn't replace human judgment. We need mechanisms to ensure accountability when things go wrong. And robust data protection and clear consent processes remain vital.
And prioritizing the human element.
Always. Human-centered design means prioritizing empathy and patient well-being. Avoiding psychological exploitation. No designing AI to be deliberately addictive or to manipulate emotions. Promoting authentic connection, not replacing it. And education for both clinicians and patients on responsible use.
What about improving prevention and education more broadly?
That's crucial at all levels. Community and school-based programs are key, providing accurate information, integrating it into curricula, fostering support systems, promoting peer mentorship. But it's also about addressing root causes.
Moving beyond just saying, don't do drugs.
Exactly. Teaching healthy coping skills, stress management, mindfulness, exercise, recognizing triggers like HL, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, early intervention for at-risk individuals, creating safe spaces for discussion, and crucially, addressing systemic issues.
Like stigma and pushing for a public health approach.
Yes, educating the public that addiction is a treatable health condition, changing societal beliefs, portraying people with substance use disorders with dignity. AI might help analyze the effectiveness of different prevention messages or strategies.
And in treatment and recovery itself, how does that human-AI collaboration look ideally?
It's about synergy. AI augments clinical judgment. It analyzes data to help create personalized care plans. Its predictive analytics flag relapse risks for early intervention. It might help refine diagnoses, especially with co-occurring disorders. It can help optimize resource allocation.
And the AI support systems.
They need to be human-centered, offering that 24/7 accessibility and real-time feedback, using smart monitoring to enhance self-awareness, not just surveil, seamlessly integrating with traditional therapy and support networks, all built on ethical principles like transparency and user control. It creates a more robust safety net.
Finally, this brings us back to those bigger questions. In a world increasingly augmented by AI, how do we think about life's purpose, well-being, meaning?
AI forces us to confront these questions, maybe even reevaluate them. AI can analyze how humans have thought about purpose across cultures and history, track changing values, simulate ethical dilemmas.
But it can't give us the answers.
No. The search for meaning remains fundamentally human, rooted in our consciousness and subjective experience. As AI takes over more tasks, perhaps it frees us up to focus more on what makes us uniquely human. But we need to be intentional about it.
Especially regarding connection.
Yes. There's a real risk of over-reliance on AI companions or algorithmic validation. We need to actively prioritize authentic human relationships, which are so vital for well-being and recovery. We need to balance AI integration with human touch.
And cultivate our own intrinsic motivation, not outsource our sense of purpose.
Exactly. Foster critical engagement with AI, understand its strengths and limitations. Ultimately, maybe the purpose in an AI era is to double down on being human. Deepening empathy, strengthening relationships, engaging in creativity, confronting those existential questions authentically. AI can be a powerful ally in human flourishing, but only if we develop and use it wisely, with respect for human dignity, autonomy, and connection.
This has been, well, a really deep dive, hugely complex. So just to wrap up the key takeaways, addiction is this intricate mix of biology, psychology, society, even philosophy.
Right. And AI gives us powerful new lenses, data analysis, prediction, personalized support tools.
But its understanding is fundamentally different. It lacks that subjective, lived experience. It's not conscious.
Which means ethics are absolutely paramount. Bias, privacy, transparency, human connection.
And the most promising future seems to be this synergy. Human insight and empathy combined with AI's analytical power.
Leveraging the best of both. And in this AI-augmented world, consciously defining our human purpose and prioritizing real connection becomes even more critical.
Absolutely. Okay, that brings us to the end of this deep dive. Thank you for that exploration. And for you listening, here's a final thought to chew on, building on what we've discussed. As AI gets better and better at simulating empathy and understanding, especially in sensitive contexts like addiction support, what happens to genuine human connection? Could relying on seemingly empathetic machines inadvertently erode our own capacity for empathy or change the nature of the therapeutic bond? What are the hidden risks alongside the obvious benefits? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us.
This is DigitView.